Okay, tonight I'm going to talk to you about landscape selection, how to maintain integrity in your landscape, how to select plants that are appropriate for your landscape so that you're not wasting your time and trying to do things that can't function, that structurally really can't work for you. And to do, I have clients that often want to have me do a design that uses not the same plants as everybody else that they see. We don't want the same thing everybody else has. Well, the reason everybody else has those plants is because, by and large, those are the plants that grow in your area. And if you want a low maintenance landscape, then you're going to have plants that are going to survive whether you fool with them or not. And that's why you have everything looking the same. That doesn't mean you have to. It just takes. That's what if you go to gardens and Disney World or wherever, and botanical gardens, you see where people are always working in the landscape to make sure that they still look good all the time and add the fertilizer and the water and just baby plants. But I touched on this with the crepe myrtle video that I recently did. Cultivars are selected and, over hundreds of years. Uh, Explorers or botanists, horticulturalists, they go to China or went to China, India, Australia, etc., Japan, and they found these unique looking plants that don't grow in Europe naturally or haven't. And they brought them back. And sometimes they went into greenhouses and never came out. But if they could figure out a way to use them in the landscape, they would. So you have plants like the boxwood, which is you just don't go out in the woods and pick up any plant and stick it in your yard. These plants are selected for their characteristics. The boxwood is selected and used often because, and there's other similar plants, they're used often because you can, they have a fine texture and you can cut them into very tight shapes. You can make walls out of them, especially, something that looks like a wall, right? The other option of that is to build a wall and put a vine on it. All right, so there's other ways of getting a wall, but you can do that with boxwood. And of course, parterres, the French parterre, you've seen those in the historical gardens. Sometimes the contemporary gardens will use them, but that's a high maintenance issue to do something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this Florida grades and standards for nursery plants, which I'm just going to use it as a source to try to talk about some of these issues for why plants are selected. Trees are selected for their, a willow has a beautiful weeping character. There's Yopon hollies, which is Yopon is a native plant. There's all kind of varieties of Yopon hollies: small, short, tall, very columnar. They're all native Yopons, and but they're not. Those are cultivated specifically in a specific way, in contrast to just finding something in nature that grows a particular way. Okay, so those are cultivars that they've come up with that plant. But regardless, you need the right plant for the right place. That's an an adage that I learned when I was in 4-H, 50 years ago. And it's still true today. And you can go to cooperative extensions offices, and they'll probably tell you the same thing today. But out of the grades and standards, I thought I'd start by saying here's a sheet talking about they talk about various types of plants, characteristics of plants. Now, this is an image of or images of what they call columnar plants. They have some different categories: columnar, upright, spreading, globe, like a globe. There's a term for that, etc. Spreading, all kind of varieties. This is a sheet on columnar plants, and you can see that it's tall, thin. And an example of that, of course, is the right here. Is the Japanese yew, the Podocarpus. There's a full one there. It can grow full, but that's still going to be growing primarily upright. So, when it's not totally happy, it's growing like that. So that tells you its primary characteristic, right? That it's going to be tall and slender. That's a number 2 plant that you were just looking at. That this is a grading system, but I'm just using it for an example. So this tall columnar plant, if you use it in a hedge, you can cut it with your clippers, or most people using gas-powered or electric trimmers, and they trim plants. They don't actually prune plants very much these days, which they should. You should. But it has a fine texture, so it takes that trimming well. You can cut it in, just like the boxwoods, into very architectonic shapes, and so you can have a wall-looking hedge out of this. Now, the issue about that is if you're using it, as you can tell, it grows very upright, and because of that, you're going to be cutting a lot off the top. As every time you go out to prune it, you're going to cut off the top because you're trying to get it, let's say, a 6-foot hedge out of it. So you're just going to cut it and cut it. It gets up to 6 foot, and you'll cut it. But it'll take a while for it actually to get wider. So I don't tend to use that in a lot of circumstances, because the requirement that we're dealing with is trying to put up a barrier that you can't see through within a year or two, and that means you'd plant a lot more of these than you would an azalea or a viburnum or something like that of a similar size. So texture is a key issue. The character of the plant is a key issue. Is it upright? Is it spreading? How does it grow? Does it bloom? If it blooms, I'm going to use this. Where is that at? I'm going to use this just an example of speaking about bloom. If it blooms, when does it bloom? Does it bloom on the old growth or the new growth? And a lot of blooming, like an azalea, it's going to happen on the old growth. So you see azaleas across the South during the early spring, and they're in these antebellum gardens, and they're just resplendent, right? They're just amazingly beautiful with all the blooms all over them. Well, those weren't trimmed. Those were selectively pruned at best, at worst. Okay, they might have not have ever been touched, but if they were touched, they cut off a limb here and a limb there. They didn't just zip off the plants, and so you'll see people using azaleas with hedges or as foundation plants, and they use their trimmers, and the blooms end up having to grow on the old growth inside the canopy of the plant, and you just don't have that bloom presented. I have firebush at in my yard, and the hummingbirds appreciate the fact that I don't trim that firebush, because if I did, they'd have a harder time getting to the blooms. As it is, the blooms hang out there on the end, and the hummingbirds come and take the nectar from it. That's the way God planned that relationship to happen. And we come along and we hack on these plants and take away the natural character of them. That's why they were selected, for their natural character. And we mutilate the natural character of these plants by doing things to them that when the horticulturalists went out into the world and found them and brought them back, their notion was not, oh, we can't wait to get these back and hack them back and to trim them into boxes. It just so happens that something like the boxwood works very well for that, but not an azalea. And let's see, then you have talking about fine textured plants. So here's an example of what you can do with a fine textured plant. That's a stopper. and they make little poodle things out of it, if you like that kind of thing. Here's a plant that has a totally different character, and that wouldn't serve you very well as a hedge. Although, to tell you the truth, if you had patience, etc., you could. These things will grow very thickly if you put a lot of them together. But that's primarily, and we'll move this over here. Primarily, it's used as because of that flower there and the sort of vertical aspect of it. We use that as an accent plant in the middle of larger beds. You got something like this croton, and those are very colorful plants. But I'm not using that as a hedge typically. Some people, you'll see people will use plants for all kinds of reasons. So I have seen homeowners use that as a hedge, but as they grow tall, they get very leggy. Again, you're not going to trim these. You can imagine using a trimmer and just those leaves are huge, and you just whack off and have half a leaf. That wouldn't look very good. So the larger the leaves are, the larger around. A fine texture leaf would be that big. A leaf on a not a fine texture would be that big or larger, right? So, and the larger the leaf, the coarser the texture. We call that a coarse texture. So something like a croton has extremely coarse texture, right? But it's, once again, we're going to select that because of its upright attitude that we can put in the middle of a ground cover kind of bed, and the color that it offers. Let's see. So I've covered those, the aesthetic aspect of why we select plants, but there's other characteristics we have to be concerned about. Where do they grow? We have a lot of plants that grow in certain parts of the United States, from Japan, China, Australia. Well, we don't have any that we don't have a whole lot that grow like, let's say, in Ethiopia, right? Because the climate is not conducive to us. You have some plants that grow well in California that are maybe Mediterranean kind of plants that may not grow in the southeast quite as well. We're more humid. That's a drier situation out in California. So where you are, your climate matters a lot. The soils matter a lot. Is the soil sandy? Is it clayey, etc.? What is the pH of the soil? So these things greatly limit. Now you can fertilize and things like that to mitigate that issue if you don't have just the right soils, but a key thing is how much water do they use? Are you going to be able to provide the water? Here in Florida, one of the shortcomings that we have is that we have a very long dry season, and stuff that may do great the rest of the year without irrigation. Boy, you just can't get through the dry season here. I mean, it really hammers these plants. So a lot of things. So you've got to do some irrigating, even on the plants that typically are doing well, and that you certainly don't touch, like from June to November hardly. They're happy pretty much. So you got to know which plant to select and why it was selected. You have to get inside the head of the people who brought them here, because they brought them to the United States so that we would have an interesting plant with a particular character, whether it be a vase-shaped tree or a columnar tree or a spreading ground cover, or just a low plant period. Those are basic issues. Now, your aesthetic, if you like to have everything fine texture, you're going to select all fine textured plants, that's fine. I tend to make more drama in the landscape. I'm going to try to have contrasting textures and things like that. But you can have integrity in your landscape as far as the health of the plant goes, by doing good plant selection and understanding why you're doing it. So I hope that helps you. Have a good day.